Everyone experiences fatigue at some point in time, and pilots are no exception. I'm sure you're aware by now that you make a lot of errors and mistakes when you work tired, be it your day job, your side hustle, or even a school assignment. But what happens when a pilot flies a plane tired? Welcome back to AirScareStories. Today I'll be looking at the deadliest air disaster in Soviet Russia's history and the deadliest accident involving a Tupolev Tu-154, the crash of Aeroflot Flight 7425. In the days of the Soviet Union, the state-run airline Aeroflot was one of the largest passenger and cargo operators in the world. With such a massive realm, there were hundreds of daily domestic passenger flights to carry people all throughout the vast Soviet Empire. Aeroflot Flight 7425 was one such domestic Soviet flight. It covered a gigantic route through Tashkent and Karshi in modern-day Uzbekistan, up to Orenburg near the Kazakhstan border, and then all the way up to Leningrad, called St. Petersburg today, near the border of Finland. The aircraft model for Flight 7425 was the Tupolev Tu-154, a three-engine Soviet workhorse which had a cruising speed of up to 530 miles per hour, with the capability of operating from unpaved and gravel airfields with only basic facilities. Given the Arctic conditions of the Soviet Union's northern and eastern regions, it was a favorite among Russian pilots. On July 10, 1985, the Tu-154 arrived at the airport in Karshi from Tashkent at 6:18 p.m., which was pretty late given that it was supposed to be taking off again at 6:45. But due to the late arrival, it didn't end up leaving Karshi until 11 p.m. The captain in charge of the plane that day was Oleg Belisov, supported by co-pilot Anatoly Pozyumsky, navigator Gary Argeyev, and flight engineer Abduvahit Mansurov. There were 5 other members of the crew serving as the flight attendants in the cabin. The plane took off from Karshi with 191 passengers on board, out of which 52 were children. For most of the flight, it was pretty smooth, normal, and uneventful. Uneventful is good. The plane was cruising at an altitude of 38,100 feet, but traveling at a relatively slow 220 knots. This low airspeed started to cause some vibrations that the cockpit crew misinterpreted as engine surges. Because of this, the crew decided to reduce engine thrust in an attempt to soften the vibrations. But of course, this only resulted in the airspeed dropping even further to 160 knots. And then this caused the plane to stall and enter into a flat spin. A stall happens when the wings of an airplane are unable to generate sufficient lift to keep it up in the air, usually because of insufficient airspeed or because of too high of an angle of attack. Either way, poor airflow over the wings means no lift, and no lift means yes, fall. With no way to control the plane, the pilots of Aeroflot Flight 7425 were unable to recover from the flat spin they'd entered, and eventually the plane crashed into the ground near Ushkuduk, Uzbekistan. There were no survivors. The investigation into the possible causes of this accident was initially a very frustrating one. The investigators couldn't find anything wrong with any of the airplane's systems. The weather on the night of the accident was calm, and there was no indication of sabotage or terrorism. When they turned their attention to the crew's performance, they hit a roadblock when they learned that the cockpit voice recorder had been destroyed in the accident. Given the fact that there wasn't much to write home about on the technical side of things, the investigators decided to work with psychologists to try to understand some of the human factors that could have contributed to the accident. They discovered that the flight crew had spent at least the past 24 hours before the departure time of the flight at the airport, making them extremely tired and fatigued by the time they took control of Flight 7425. Although regulations did exist back then to try to limit work time for flight crews in order to prevent exhaustion and fatigue, they were kind of a joke and were pretty inadequate. So what happens when an exhausted pilot tries to fly an airplane? Well, if this story has taught us anything, it's that it won't end well. Although not very common, aviation incidents and accidents involving tired crews do happen on occasion. The International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, states that fatigue is prevalent among pilots for a variety of reasons, including unpredictable work hours, long duty periods, the disruption of the body's time clock or circadian rhythm, and insufficient sleep. In such states, pilots are more likely to be sluggish and are more prone to making errors in the cockpit. The crew is also more likely to have lapses in attention, make procedural mistakes, be unable to anticipate events, have a higher than normal tolerance for risk, be forgetful, and experience a reduced decision-making ability. A study by the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, between 1978 and 1999 showed that the number of accidents increased proportionally to the number of hours pilots had been flying. It's estimated that 4 to 7% of all civil aviation accidents can be attributed to fatigue. In 2016, NTSB Vice Chairman Robert Sumwalt stated that from 2000 to 2016, fatigue had been associated with 250 fatalities in carrier accidents. To try to mitigate some of this fatigue, regulators have limited the number of hours pilots are allowed to fly over varying periods of time. The implementation of ever more strict regulations remains one of the best ways to combat this. However, not all airlines may follow or adhere to these regulations. One such situation was the unfortunate crash of Aeroflot Flight 7425. If you like this video and want to help me so I don't have to keep wearing this one same shirt in every single video, please consider supporting me on Patreon, link in the description. If you want to hear more stories of aviation incidents and accidents, why not hit the like and subscribe buttons? It's free. Is there an aviation story you'd like me to cover? Leave it in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next AirScareStories.